Hello, I'm Sujoti Kretz. I'm a localization program lead at Vitaccess. Today we are going to delve into the subject of how to translate a digital app for a smartphone, approaches, common pitfalls and solutions. And we are joined by a wonderful panel of experts. Hello, my four guests. Could you say a bit about yourselves, by your name, where you're based, and how what you do relates to the discussion? We can start with Kokoro.
Hi. Yes. Hi. I'm Kokoro. I'm a freelance translator from English to Japanese, and worked on some Vitaccess projects. And the role was to proofread and review and screenshot review. I'm based in Canada, Montreal. And my background is actually primarily in nursing. I worked in this state-of-art university hospital for the ENT and head and neck surgery department. But I have experience working in a software quality assurance company as a linguist and a coordinator, being a liaison between the local team and the Japanese client, providing translator, interpretation, and some level of comfort that the Japanese clients can communicate with us in Japanese. And after that, with all the experience, I started freelancing and currently focusing on more medical subject matter because that is my background. And yeah, so it was a great opportunity to work with Vitaccess colleagues and with some project.
Thank you. Stephen?
Volante. And my brief biography is in the late 2000s, I was in a program studying interpreting at Boston University, which really, through just chance and good luck, positioned me in the right place at the right time. And a research team at the Harvard Medical School and the NGO Partners in Health found me and hired me to work in-house to support a research project they were doing in Peru. So I really established myself as an interpreter and translator, working for 2.5 years in-house at Partners in Health. And then I began to freelance in medical translation. And I've always continued to work in the Harvard community, first at Harvard Medical School, and then since last year, I've been at an outfit called Center for Biostatistics and AIDS Research, which supports clinical trials of treatments for HIV, tuberculosis, a few other infectious diseases. So I'm an administrator there, but I've also taken on a role as a proofreader and editor. So I have about 70 colleagues who are statisticians and epidemiologists who are writing reports and manuscripts for these clinical trials. So I have some experience, well, my experience as a linguist and how it's forced me to learn proofreading and editing has really begun to pay off there. And my connection to Vitaccess is just over 2 years ago, the Rockefeller Center in Latin American Studies at Harvard held a conference in medical translation. And so I met someone there who gave you my name. And I've done about 6 of these projects, mostly proofreading and screenshot review, since about 2 years ago.
Yeah, you were involved in one of our first projects. Great. Salma, can you say a bit about yourself, please?
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Salma. I'm working WordBee as a technical support. So I'm just joining here in case you would need any assistance regarding the application, the platform. Yeah, and I'm based in Cairo, Egypt. So yeah.
Yeah, and also you'll be able to give us some insight into how an app is, how a translation tool is very useful in translating our app content.
Yep.
And you've helped us a lot with that as well. And
Yes.
Bianca?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Bianca, and I've been working as a JavaScript developer for the past 4 years. 3 of them have been on the Vitaccess projects. I am currently based in Oxford since the beginning of this year, but I am originally from Romania, and my work has been mainly focused on backend development. And for a bit of context, the backend refers to the server side and database part of an app, and it contains the activities that happen behind the scene when a user performs an action on any website or mobile app. It is mainly stuff like logging into an account or performing an online payment. Its main job is to communicate the database information to the browser. And for a common example, is when you are reading an article on a blog, the fonts, color, design, and buttons, all of these constitute the front end of the page. But the content of the article is rendered from a server and fetched from a database, and this is the backend part. And this is what I mainly do on the Vitaccess projects.
Yeah, you've been very heavily involved in creating all the raw files and using the translations for the application for transferring them into the app content for smartphones. Um, um, at Vitaccess, we develop real-world evidence apps into various languages and countries, and these apps are designed to help for patients, to help us understand patient quality of life, burdens of disease, the impacts of disease and treatments on patients, and improve patients' quality of life and their treatment. So my first question would be, it's a question for the linguist. We'll start with Stephen. Can you tell us about your experience of how translating for a digital health app differs from other types of translations?
Okay, well, I think the first thing to say is in these Vitaccess projects I've worked on, I haven't actually done any translation. So and I was thinking about this before the meeting, that this working with Vitaccess was a somewhat new and positive experience for me. Being part of a larger team, really in a very meticulous multi-step process where I'm stepping in at the later stages, where I see the content, it's been translated and checked, and you're moving it closer to, the final release on the app, and you just need to know that the text is linguistically appropriate, it's localized properly for the United States, really just going through it in detail and looking for, any obvious or not so obvious errors that require correction, but also ways to refine the text or polish it so that you end up with the best possible product.
Yeah, you've been involved in adaptation, not translation. And
right.
you did because we've adapted UK English for US English, and as working with you, I found that you brought some you made some really good points in how to improve the translation. It's like as a UK English, I would as a UK English native speaker, and I would see the app for UK English, and for me, it would be just changing maybe the spelling, analyze the S into Z, for example, for US. Whereas when you do the reviews, you have it's more than just adapting the spellings. It's just making it linguistically and culturally appropriate,
Right.
so that it's clear for patients.
Right. And another, I mean, in your agenda, there's a question about specific languages and the differences. And what I wanted to say about that was, as a translator, I work in 2 Romance languages. I translate from French and Spanish to English. So the relevant experience I've gained is that, you know, we say in the Romance languages, when you translate into English, the source text is generally longer, more verbose than your translation into English. So bridging the differences in linguistic style between Romance languages and English really forces you to think about how to communicate clearly, concisely, don't waste words, don't make a text longer than it needs to be for your audience to understand. And then that becomes especially important. And the best example of that is when you ask me to do screenshot reviews. So I get to see the product very close to the end, very close to the release, almost what the end user will see. And I can look at it and look at each screen. Is there a way to refine this or polish it, make it fit a little better, or the text in relation to the rest of the space on the screen to make it just more user friendly?
Yeah, screenshot reviews are very crucial part of the end part, end step of the localization process, because that's where we see everything in context, and you see how everything fits on the screen, how the words are truncated, and it applies for like other more complex languages. We'll talk about that later. Yeah, it's more, when we localize apps, it's more of it's a more rigorous approach than doing a standard translation, just a straightforward translation.
Right. And another point I've learned about that is I can review these texts. So they're really like discrete chunks of text that will go onto a screen. And I can look at them and think of ways to improve them. And I can make suggestions to you. And there was one project recently, you ultimately didn't adopt most of my suggestions, but it's not my role to dictate what you do. It's just to give you options, and then you can consider. It's your product, and you're just asking me for input. So it's like I mentioned earlier, part of a team, multi-step process. I'm just one contributor, and there's value in doing that, even if you don't adopt what I do. And this also applies to my day job, where I'm proofreading and editing for people who are publishing in major medical journals. I just offer suggestions. It's their work, and I tell them it's their decisions to make, whether they agree with me or not.
Yeah, definitely. We get lots of suggestions for change, and sometimes we need to be careful, especially when there's other parties involved, because we can't implement all the changes. It takes more resources to make the changes, but we make sure that still the content is still appropriate for the target audience. We double check with you if we do not make the change, will the text still be understood by the patient? Is it an essential change? And things like that.
Right.
So my next question would be, what are the issues and challenges that are encountered during translation of an app in your experience compared to other types of translation? I guess we've kind of covered that a bit with Stephen, but Cora, could you give your point of view on that? Because you've been involved, you haven't been involved to the end part of a project, but you started working with Japanese. You've got a very good insight of the kind of problems that your specific language has when it comes to translating an app.
Yes, specific challenges. I'd say in general, like when it comes to the app translation or localization, the challenging part is the clear, like if the context is unclear. And but then because the text can be so short, and if we don't know the context, we can't translate in like multiple ways. So but actually for the particular project that I worked on, like, I had the screenshots and then had all um, the screens, and I know that the when and where the text is displayed, and that was very helpful. But and I find particularly for this project, what was challenging was to sorry to select a correct word, like a word choice for the user experience, because we know that it's gonna be used by patients. So I wanted to make sure that it's very user friendly, accurate, and then relevant, and also wanted to we need to be sure that we don't use like super difficult medical terms, but at the same time they are familiar with their own disease or conditions. So in that case, we can actually feel comfortable to go with some level of medical terms to, and so in order for me to see which level of the medical terms can be used. I visited some of the uh, famous, popular patient supporting websites, and so that was very helpful. But actually, the project itself, that it was quite straightforward, and there was no like big challenge or like difficulty, and that can be because that I have a software quality assurance background, so I kind of know like how the application is designed, and I can guess like, oh, probably this text probably is going to be used in that content as well, so I can make connections. But it can be actually a good idea for us to have an overview of the structure of the application, like detailing or just a summary of how like what are the contents, all of the contents, so that it'll be helpful for us to decide which word we gotta choose and use in translation. But there were not like many difficulties actually or issues.
That's good to hear. But in my experience, of managing translations in different languages, there definitely are few languages that are more challenging than others in localization of an app because of the way they are written, the special characters, their grammatical structures, because they are a group of languages that are different from other groups of languages linguistically and culturally. So in terms of Salma, I wanted to have your point of view in terms of CAT tools. Are there some languages that you've found are more challenging to translate when you have to import them into the CAT tool, or just the usability of a language, the structure of a language? Does a CAT tool help us resolve issues that we could have uh, compared to if we're just doing on paper, translating on a Word document?
Yes, yes. Well, definitely. When it comes to languages, let's say that are from left to right or from right to left, Persian languages, Asian languages as well. These differences, you need to maintain the layout, and you need to make sure that at the end you would have the translation that is the same as the source file. You're not going way off. So in the CAT tool, for all of these languages, we do have some options, either while parsing or reading the file in the first place, just to make sure that the system would define if you're translating to an Asian language or to a Persian language, so that, let's say, the formatting of the language itself won't impact the translated file. We also have the QA check, which is very helpful when it comes to making sure that there are no differences either in the language structure itself. You can run a bunch of QA check. You can enable a lot of options there to make sure that the translation is well maintained and the structure of the translation itself is well maintained. Yeah, that would be generally it.
Yeah, and I found as well, like you can make the translation is more consistent with terms when you use a CAT tool because you've
Yes.
got the term base that you can refer to.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can add labels as well. So as Pakar was mentioning, sometimes if you have terms that are too complicated, you don't want to use them. So you can actually, in the resources on the platform, you can add labels to them to define that, okay, this is a term that is too complicated not to be used. And there are other terms that you would promote them on others. So you can add labels to that to define these terms. Yep.
Yeah, I think CAT tool is like essential. It's like it's critical when you do translate an app where there's lots of repetitions as well. You need it because if you translate it in one way in one part, a different way in another part, it will cause confusion with the patients, and consistency is very
Yeah,
important
definitely.
for an
Yeah,
app.
this is actually a good point because we do have something that is called the auto propagation, which helps in if you have a text that is already repeated within the document. Once you just translate it once, it will be auto propagated throughout the whole document. You won't need to repeat the same translation. Also, for the context, you can extract comments and context on the CAT tool itself. So you would have a little bit of a background on the translation or what should be translated instead of having things blindly. Because I understand having just words like this make it difficult sometimes to execute the translation. So for that, you can also extract the context and the comments. A good thing also is the preview, which allows you to, and the pseudo translation. These two options are really helpful when it comes to as you said, you don't want anything to go off screen, so you don't want the translation length to be way too long from the source. You don't want to go off screen, for example. So you can do something that is called pseudo translate, which helps you in visualizing how the translated file would look like, and you can control the amount of characters, for example, per segment, or so that when you do the translation, you know that you don't want to go off limit with the characters, and then you can preview the file in the end just to see how the file or the translated file, the final file, would look like. Yep.
Yeah, that's a very good feature of a CAT tool because when you translate app, you often find that there's character limitation on the screen. So that's a very useful feature for us.
Yeah.
And Bianca, have you come across languages that have been more difficult than others for back-end development work?
Well, every language that me or other developers don't know comes with these challenges because we lose that ability to spot mistakes when we implement them. And then we basically just copy and paste something that we cannot question. Because sometimes for English, which we all know, we did spot some small mistakes and we were able to flag them to the localization team. But one example that I can think of would be Spanish, which has the upside down question mark. And characters like this are always a new challenge because you might find that some of them are not displayed correctly or at all in the application. So we have to find some way to fix them. And we have to test a lot more and be more careful with them. But so far, nothing very difficult. But however, in the future, we are going to add Japanese to one of our projects, and that will definitely come with some new set of problems that we don't realize right now.
Yeah, we do lots of it. We are project managers, localization project managers are at Vitaccess. We are the go-between between linguist and the development team. So we get the translation from the linguist and then submit to for development, and there's issues, then we check with the linguist. So there's always this communication, and then the more we learn with each new language that we work on, we learn more. So we try to anticipate problems. So yeah, it's ongoing it's never straightforward for Bianca, but yeah, but we work together. We get through it. We have the end result at the end, so it
Yeah,
works.
and also the fact that the medical environment is so strict, it doesn't always help because sometimes we might spot something like missing question marks or punctuation sign, and we might flag them as mistakes, but actually they are not. We are not allowed to change that.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely like, yeah, what you do behind the scene, Bianca. It's we don't realize how much work that goes into it, but and we try to help you getting feedback from linguists as well. And we analyze the content as well. We need to see, for example, if there's like address formats different for each countries. We try to get the information beforehand, so you can, if there's more specific development work that you need to do in the background, so you have the information beforehand. So when we have the raw file, we are better prepared down the line. Um, some Now I'd like to talk about like the different types of contents in an app. Um, are there different localized, do you think we require different localization approaches or methods for different types of contents? I think, I don't know, Stephen, have you had experience of different types of contents working with Vitaccess? For example, patient surveys and the app, general app content itself. Have you seen any difference in the way we approach them in terms of
Not not within the the patient content, the patient facing content that I think I would echo what Kokoro said earlier about um, recognizing that your audience is not healthcare providers, so you're not using that register, but the audience are people who have, most of them have been living with a condition for years or maybe their whole lives, so they know. You don't have to use strictly lay language. And earlier today, the other point I'd make is I went back through the list of projects I've done for you and looked at that content, and there was one that stood out because it was a press release. It wasn't a translation, it was just a press release that your office issued, and you just asked me to proofread it. So that was just strictly just polishing it, trying to make it flow, read a little more smoothly and effectively. But in answer to your question, I would echo what Kokoro said earlier, and I can't think of anything else to add.
So like we got different types of app content. So we apply different steps depending on the content. So for example, when we got PROs or PCOs, which are patient-centered outcomes, which are surveys that the patients answer. So for them, we do EPRO, we do we do EPRO, what we call EPRO updates. We do updates on them to make them appropriate to be administered on an electronic format. So we call that the EPRO update step. We do at least one forward translation, one back translation review, cognitive debriefing, which is testing the comprehension of the surveys with patients or healthy subjects. We do revision or proofreading, and then the last step is screenshot reviews. And for general app content is such as registration and consents, privacy notices, marketing material that Stephen just talked about, social media posts. For that is just a straightforward forward translation and proofreading step. And for patient surveys, we need a more rigorous approach with the back translation. So it's when it's translated into the target language and then back translated into the source language, which is English. So we can do an analysis of how it's been translated, if it's conceptually equivalent to the source. So we can check that there's no inconsistencies, there's no diversions from the source, that the intended meaning is being conveyed. Yeah, that's the the PROs, I would say, which have the more elaborate process in the localization process. And it's sometimes more challenging because sometimes we've got PROs, rated outcomes, or PCOs, patient-centered outcomes, it's the same kind of surveys. And we have existing versions, and we have to do electronic updates on them for electronic administration, but you have to be really careful how we update them because they've already been validated, they've been psychometrically tested. So we don't have the freedom to do all the changes that we want on them. So there's the fine balance between if changes are required, we need to check with the copyright holders. It's a more elaborate process. So what I would like to know, so I guess you've already mentioned Kokora, probably you already, and Stephen. What do you feel about the back translation process? I'm talking to the linguist. Have you been involved with that, Kokoro, for Japanese yet for the surveys? Okay. So we can talk a bit about CAT tools, computer-assisted translation tools. So you've covered that already. I was going to ask, how can CAT tool help us optimize the translations? You discussed that already, but do you think a CAT tool should be customized for each client depending on their specific localization needs?
This question is, of course, for me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. Generally, there would definitely be some customizations regarding either the content or the language that the translator is working on. But these are just general customizations that you can set, say, on the platform itself. When it comes to the CAT tool where the actual work happens or the translation is happening, there are some customizations that the translator could do, but this is more like to match their interface or say their preferences. Let's say, for example, if you have characters that you want to be automatically converted, either the question marks or the upside down question marks, the curly brackets, the straight brackets, you can customize that for your interface per user, so that whenever you write a question mark, a straight one, it will be automatically converted or changed to upside down by the system. So I'd say generally there would be some customizations that are applied on the platform regarding each language or content, but still there is some flexibility for each user to do some customization on their own when they're using the CAT tool itself, when they are working on the translation itself.
Okay. And for example, I was talking about the back translation step, back translation reviews. Is there the specific customization that's required in the CAT tool for us to have those steps? There's
Yes.
coding and stuff work that I think you've helped us with that, and that's been very useful.
Yes. So this is usually before, this is just set up before the file is already up for translation. So you set up the tasks that you want, either forward translation, back validation, all of the ones, all of the tasks that would require, to translate either from source to target or from target to source, generating new versions of target or generating new versions of source language. So we offered that as well. You can, once you set these tasks and you define the direction of the task. So let's say if I want to translate from target to source, I already generated the target. Now I want to go backwards to just validate my translation. So you can create such task, and once the translator uses the cat tool, they would immediately find the target is set for them as the source, as the one that they need to work, start working on, and generating a new version of the target language. So this is mainly for the, let's say, the project managers, just to define the tasks that they need and the direction of each task. So the translator won't be worrying about, okay, what am I working on now? No, once they just open the cat tool, they are immediately directed to what they need to work on. Either they would see the target as the source for them, and they would immediately start working on generating the new version of the target. They could also view different versions. So let's say, for example, if you want them to see the source, the target v1, and they are going to work on generating a v2 of the target. So you can show them that as well, control to show them that, so that they would be able to do the comparisons. So yeah.
Okay, great. Bianca, wanted to go back a bit about on the raw files that you work on. So when you do backend development, what are some considerations that you make for different languages? For example, I can think of string variables, right to left sentences, different address formats that to mention, units and measures for different countries. Can you tell us a bit more about these and other examples if you have any?
Yeah, sure. String variables are a tricky part to handle, especially in the content for email, because there you have a lot of them spread across the entire email text. And to do a proper localization, you need all of that text in order to translate it with context. It doesn't make sense to give to the localization team the text before a variable and after it separately, because some languages have a totally different way of formulating content. Some might start with that variable text, and some might end with it. And in cases like this, we collaborated a lot with the localization team in order to figure out a way in which to flag the variables in the text, and to find a proper name, a proper way to name them in order for the translators to know not to translate that word. For example, in email, we might have something like dear username, and the word username is actually the variable, and we might keep it in brackets. And this way, we can send the entire content instead of sending just dear. So the linguist can rearrange the words, translate them again, and they know that whatever is in bracket, it's a variable, and they don't translate that. And also for units and the currencies, we have a bit of a tough time, because if the user at some point changes his country or language, then the content changes. And for example, we display miles instead of kilometers as a text in the app, but that also means we have to convert the actual value that is stored in the database in order to make sense and display the correct unit. And So far, I have not implemented a language with the right to left sentences, but when that would be the case, most of the changes will be on the front end part of the app because the entire user experience and probably design will have to change. And the backend part of an app should not care about how something is displayed. Its main job is to handle that data.
Yeah. And Bianca, does speaking Romanian, does that help you analyze language content when when building the raw files?
Yeah, in some cases it does help because Romanian is a bit more complex than English when it comes to pronouns and persons. And in the current project that we are developing, we have both adult and child patient. And in some languages, you have a more formal approach for the adults. And luckily for me, Romanian is one of those languages. So it was very easy for me to spot the content that would need to be translated into two versions. And by this, I mean content that is sometimes not as obvious to spot until too late, like the error messages that we display.
Yeah. And do you find that there's some parts of the apps that are more difficult than others for you to develop?
Well, content-wise, that would probably be the PROs and the surveys parts, because each new project, the project comes with some new types of questions, like questions that loop, and those require some careful planning in order not to break what you already have. And we also had a specific case in which the number of the questions displayed in a survey was different for different countries and languages. So we have to approach that in a different way for each language.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Um, so I think it's time to come to the conclusion. We're running out of time. So we've had a very interesting discussion, I think. And my thoughts on after listening to you is that when you translate an app, you need to bear in mind who the target audience is, what the purpose of the app is. In our context, the top priority is that the content should be understandable to our patients, that it is understood as intended. And as Bianca mentioned, we just talked about front end involvement. Design also plays an equally important aspect. So the app is structured in a user-friendly way, so the patients can navigate through it easily and intuitively, so they complete the surveys as they are intended. And despite differences in languages, it is critical that content has the same conceptual meaning across all the languages to be able to get good, reliable data for pooling, aggregation, and research. And we localization team, development team, we've tried to find solutions to these linguistic and cultural differences in the localization process to eliminate any bias that could be introduced. Um, there are some app contents which are more sensitive than others, such as patient-centered outcomes or PROs and patient surveys. We need a more rigorous localization approach for these. And Salma, as you said, using a CAT tool that is adapted to specific localization methodologies is crucial in app localization. It allows for consistent approach in translation, consistency in terminology across different contents and apps, and optimizes localization process for Vitaccess and our linguists. And different languages can have different constraints during localization process and anticipating for these constraints is essential when building the raw files for localization and app development process to run smoothly during the whole process. And is there anything that you would like to add to this before we end our discussion?
No, I'd just say that it's been great to learn the perspectives, particularly of Bianca and Salma, to learn, really get that complete picture of how, and see how my contributions fit into the end product, but also what else it takes to reach the end.
Yep, and there's a whole load of other people involved that they're not here, but we'll try to have discussions to get input for everyone, so we know what it takes to develop an app. This is like from a localization perspective. There's from Bianca's perspective, there's other things that are more crucial as well from everyone's perspective. So there's a lot that goes into it. So I'd like to thank you all for taking part. Thank you, Kokoro. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Salma. It's been great talking to you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.